Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Hello and welcome today to Not Just Ads, the Creator Economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by somebody who has a wealth of experience in the B2B space, Simon Hayhurst. Simon has been working in B2B marketing for 30 years. For the last 8, he's been very focused on B2B research. He's provided insights for some of the most well-known global tech brands, including Microsoft, Salesforce, Meta, Amazon, and TikTok, amongst many others. Simon, thanks very much for joining us on the show. Delighted to have you on.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Simon, you have a lot of experience in the space and you've probably seen how trends come and go, but there's some fundamentals that still ring true now versus what they did 30 years ago or so. Why do you think, why talking to your customers beats just talking to AI, especially now?
Of course, AI is very powerful in terms of what they do and how they operate, but maybe I'll start with an anecdote, a true one. It'll put this into context. So at one point in his life, Sam Walton, who was the guy who found Walmart, was the richest man in America. And the story goes that once a week, every week, even at the height of his wealth, Sam would travel to a random store in his chain and spend the morning working on the tills. Now, the reason he did this was not so that he could help out the store at a busy time or save a few bucks on the wage bill, because whilst pushing through the scanner, he'd fire off questions to each customer he served and would say, so tell me, why do you shop here? Beep. Where else do you shop? And what do you like about them? Beep. Why don't you buy all your groceries at Walmart? Beep. If we could change one thing about the store, what would it be? Beep. And so on. And then at the end of the morning on the tills, I would summon the store manager to his office and tell them exactly what he thought needed to be done to improve the store's revenue, profit, based on immediate customer feedback. Now, Sam Walton spoke personally to dozens of his customers every week, thousands of his customers every year. He knew more about his customers than his store managers did. And yes, for many years, he was the richest man in America. I think those two facts are very closely related. And yet it's amazing how few marketers actually spend time, any amount of time, in the same room as their market. And yet Sam did this for hours at a time, relentlessly, week in, week out. And I guess we could all pause there and just ask ourselves, how do we make the time to talk to our own customers and better understand where greater sales and greater margins lie in this world of just working at the speed of life and 1,001 different things? And of course, the temptation these days is to get an AI to do the research for you. It's far quicker than traditional market research. It costs far less. And it's all very tempting to a CMO who's under the cosh when sales are under pressure and margins underwater. But I just would caution this. Before a CMO reaches for the AI app to ask it to turn around a moribund market share graph, there are just a couple of reasons to pause. Firstly, these LLMs are trained on publicly available data, what people have said or done that is in the public realm. They're incredibly quick. And the answers are incredibly seductive, but they do tend to hallucinate. So, topical example, imagine asking an LLM that's been trained on X, to rank the last 20 US presidents in order of popularity. Now, it could tell you in an instant, but how would it conduct the ranking? What data would it use? What data would it disregard? On what basis? And how reliable or unreliable might its answer be? Which in turn means that if a CMO is going to rely on an LLM to give them strategic market advice, that same advice is available to all the CMO's competitors. If they all use the same prompts, they all get the same advice. Bespoke market research of the sort that Sam Walton did tells you what people are privately thinking, not historically, but right now, which could be infinitely more valuable commercially. Now, Sam Walton may have spoken to thousands of his own customers, but he certainly didn't then go to Kmart's management and tell them what he'd learned. He spoke to those customers privately, and he kept it to himself and his managers, and his competition didn't know what he was finding out. He didn't know what they were up to. So there's no competitive advantage to asking an LLM to do your research for you, because everyone else who asks that LLM can get the same research. With your own research, you only get to decide what questions to ask of your audience, and only you get to see what the audience is saying. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't use AI to help you analyze the data. AI is super fast at spotting data patterns that even the most statistically literate CMO might miss. But the point is, the CMO who commissions their own research on what their audience are privately thinking owns the data. No one else can have it. No one else gets to interrogate it. And that's why I think there is still a place for market research rather than AI research in the marketing industry.
Do you think that there's a place then for synthetic data in terms of, if, let's say, the point you mentioned, obviously, if you put it into an open LLM, you're going to get the same feedback out as everyone else, no matter how sophisticated the prompt is. But if there's a way, like you mentioned, about doing market research by, let's say it's a group of CMOs or CIOs, whoever the buying committee profile is, and you close off their answers and you're able to then like build some kind of model for synthetic data that can help you, not to rely on it solely, but to give you some reasoning maybe for that versus future surveys. Do you think there's any kind of like a hybrid approach that's maybe effective, but let's say it's not 100% reliable, but it gives them maybe feedback quicker? There's an argument there for it could be effective to some extent in terms of the efficiency part.
Yeah, and I use LLMs myself when writing questionnaires, for example. So if I want to go to a client says that they want to ask a bunch of CTOs what 6 things are keeping them awake at night, for example, I might ask an LLM to give me the top 10 reasons that might be the case as a start point to help me write the questionnaire. What that won't tell me is, in real life, what order in which those CTOs are worried about these particular instances, and it won't then allow me to go back and analyze the real data in terms of what segment they're in, what country they're in, whatever segment, and take that data and analyze it for myself. So using LLMs to help shape research is absolutely legitimate, but it's not a substitute for actually asking people in private what they are thinking privately about the things that you want to know about. I think that's particularly true in B2B. Certainly in B2C, if you're an FMCG company, there's a certain volume of synthetic data that's out there can give you a reasonable indication of which way a particular market is going, for example. But for B2B, that's much, much harder and far less reliable. So the nichest brief I ever had for a research project was a client who wanted to research procurement managers in the Middle East in the oil industry who'd purchased a piece of software that monitored the performance of drill bits when they are underground. Now, there might only be an audience of 200 procurement managers across the whole of the Middle East who've ever actually done that. So if you asked a vendor of synthetic B2B data to produce that for you, you have to wonder, where's your training data come from? Because the market is so small, synthetic data can't possibly reimagine what those people would say. So, yeah, synthetic data has its place, AI has its place, but actually talking to people, there's really no replacement for it.
Definitely. Maybe you could talk us through that though, because like you're commissioned to do research for many of the top brands globally. How do you effectively get the ear of people that have that decision-making power, and then also build enough trust with them so they actually tell you really what's on their own mind, not just like the corporate line of, okay, look, we're focusing on this because it's aligned with what's in our earnings call this month, but really getting into the underlining motivations, whether that's, sometimes decisions aren't always driven by logic. It's more like emotionally driven. Maybe it could be that they're pushing for a promotion. They want to go with a safe bet, whatever it is. Like when you interview these people, first of all, how do you get their attention so that they give you time? And then secondly, how do you get them so that you're getting real clarity, but also honesty in terms of the feedback that they give you as well?
So I think one of the key things where market research is different to sales research, I don't do sales research. I don't pass on leads to people saying, hey, you talk to this guy, he's up right. And so when I'm recruiting people to talk to me, that's part of the promise that I make. Now, your name nor your organization will be passed to the client who's commissioning the data. They may, with your permission, see a copy of the transcript. With your permission, they might even be able to view it if you're happy about that. The point is that these people are opening up to me to tell me what their business problems are with a view that a potential vendor is going to deliver a solution to the thing that is keeping them awake. And CTOs, CFOs, CMOs all know that if they can let potential vendors know on an anonymized basis what is troubling them, what it is they need to know, where their existing solutions are letting them down, where they need new solutions to be developed, they understand that they're helping potential solution providers deliver something that they actually need. And so they see value in it. And providing, as I say, I can be trusted not to pass their contact details on to the person who's commissioning the research, they know they're not going to be bombarded with sales calls in the media aftermath. And yet, potentially, the market is going to be informed by the things that they actually need to be generated. And that's how we work. It's on a trust basis. If I let people down in terms of that trust, then people don't talk to me and I don't have work. I honor that and I live by that. And that's how it works. And that's why people are prepared to talk.
And I can imagine as well from the different conversations that you have, what you can share with them that's outside NDA, it's probably very valuable as well, because at least from what I find talking to senior leaders in B2B, it's not really what the new thing on the market is. It's more is what's the problem and how people are looking at it.
Yeah. And so basically everything they tell me is off the record, which is the second part of your question, which is, yeah, I know we've got a sales call that says we are pushing in this market, but in fact, we're finding it incredibly difficult because of X is something you cannot say on the record, but can be quite helpful to say off the record if it means a future solution coming to market.
What do you think then in terms of the amount of time you've been in the industry for a significant amount of time? And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's been a number of trends in B2B with technology breakthroughs and so on. But what do you think are some of the fundamentals that still ring true now versus when you got into the industry 30 years ago?
I did a business degree in 1981. And one of the core things I learned it's called the extended model of decision making. And it particularly applies to B2B, but also to large consumer purchase like a car or something. And that typically buyers go through 5 stages: problem awareness, information search, evaluation, decision, and then post-purchase review. And I still use that framework as a framework for many of the questionnaires and many of the interviews I run, because essentially that's what marketers need to know. What is the trigger for a purchase? Who commits to doing the research? Who do they consider? On what basis do they consider them? What is important to them? Who is involved in the buying committee? Who influences? Who decides? And most interestingly, once they've bought, does the solution they bought actually solve the problem that was the original trigger? And if it doesn't, where is it falling short? That framework, I learned that 30 odd, nearly 40 years ago, and I still apply it today. The nature of the challenges are pretty similar too. We're not selling enough. We need to make more sales. We need to create more margin. Those challenges are eternal. And the frameworks which we use to resolve them are eternal. The technologies through which we get the answers aren't. Yep, I will record a conversation like this and use a private AI to write up the transcript without me having to spend 2 hours going back typing it up. And I can privately interrogate the transcript without allowing anyone else to do it to find out what the key insights were that people said in different interviews. So the technology has made it much easier. But the core process, I don't think has changed at all. It hasn't needed to.
It's interesting. I was talking to the global head of B2B at HP last week, and he's pretty seasoned in his career like yourself. And one of the things he mentioned to me as well is they were talking about ABM and how they looked at it. And it was basically expansion within when the RFP lands. They see, okay, this person is putting out this RFP, and then they basically just look and see, okay, they don't know that we do these other type of products as well, and they have a need for that. So they basically have this meeting and then they showcase their products and so on. But the thing that I found from this was it was just really simple. They weren't looking at, okay, we need to bring them through this sequence and then they're in market and so on. It was just there's an opportunity here. How can we create some education to expand the opportunity? And we have a time frame. And if we do that within 90 days, because the sales cycle is probably maybe 18 months or more, but if we see the opportunity increases within those 90 days, marketing gets some attribution for that, and sales are happy to work with us because they can see impact within 90 days. But the reason I bring it up is because I think now in B2B, There are so many tools, there's so many KPIs, there's so many different ways of looking at things, the next tools that come out and so on. I think people sometimes get lost in that, but some of the bigger organizations and that seem to do it effectively, it's they keep things relatively simple and they measure things relatively simple and it seems to work. I don't know, from your experience, do you see the people that you work with, do they have a similar approach, or because it's a so long sales cycle, you have to embrace that there will be some complexity to it?
There is complexity to it and you can dig down, but you can get lost in the weeds. One of the fascinating things I found, you were talking earlier about emotional versus rational. An awful lot of time when an organization comes into what might be called a category entry point, that a trigger happened that means they have a problem, they can't resolve it internally, their existing vendor can't resolve it, therefore they have to go to market to find it. Very few companies, very few CTOs, CMOs, whoever is leading the purchase, have the time to do a whole of market review to find the best fit solution. They don't have the time. And so at the problem awareness stage, very often what whoever's leading the purchase, whoever has the need that needs resolving, will ask is, who have we heard of who's got a good solution to this? So let's say you're not happy with your CRM. It's poor, it needs updating, it's legacy, it's expensive, whatever it is. You ask yourself, who have we heard of who's got a good solution to this? And so obviously Salesforce will come pretty much top of mind for most people, and then maybe HubSpot, and then maybe two or three others. But unless your brand comes to top of mind when people ask themselves that question, it's actually very unlikely that you'll be invited to tender, which is why unprompted brand awareness and then prompted brand awareness are really important things. If a B2B marketer can make their brand famous for having a relevant, distinctive, credible solution to a pressing problem, then they will come top of mind and they will get on the long list and then the short list. Because quite often the long list is 5 and the short list is 3 or 2. Sometimes the long list is just 1. And so that's a really important thing people to remember. The drawing up of the long list is rarely thorough or extended or rational. And then the further down you get into the funnel, the more and more the tires get kicked until you get to the final decision. So, right, here are 18 criteria. We need to know that you will excel on all these different things in all these different ways, because no one buys a solution on a whim. No one says, oh, I'm bored today, let's buy ourselves a new CRM. No one ever does that. The rational part, the uber rational part, comes at the moment of purchase, but the least rational part is at the top of the funnel. And that's a really interesting thing to research. And it comes up time and time again.
How do you think then, look, let's take the example of CRM like Salesforce. They obviously need the category in enterprise for CRMs. And then you have a disruptive technology like Anthropic. It comes along and it just puts everything on its head, or OpenAI over the last few years. They play by a different rule book now because it's okay. They're not competing with Salesforce, but they have this disruptive technology. So they've gained this kind of like a preference, maybe out of necessity, because it's seen as a need in the market for this new technology. But if you're somebody that's competing with somebody like Salesforce and you're in the enterprise CRM space, but let's say you serve a certain niche, I'm inventing, let's say it's, shipping, and you do CRMs for shipping.
Yeah.
How do you think you would basically compete against somebody like Salesforce when you have that upper part of the funnel? Is it like you go very niche in the segment that you're targeting, or how do you, from the research that you see, brands that kind of compete against some of these like big brands in the category? Do you see any examples of like brands that do that well by either focusing on a particular niche category within that or being distinctive in some way or the other?
Distinctiveness is key. You remember I said that the art of being a marketer in B2B is to make yourself famous for having a solution that is relevant and distinctive and credible. So in terms of competing with the likes of Salesforce head on, you've got to make it relevant to your market. So you have to go narrow, because going broad, you're going to waste an awful lot of bucks making yourself well known, but not necessarily for where you have a distinctive and credible offering. And you will tend to have to go narrow in order to make yourself famous within your segment. I'm sure Professor Mark Ritson and all the others will argue that there is an argument to making you famous across an entire segment rather than narrow within one. But you need big bucks to be able to do that. And in B2B, marketers tend not to have big bucks. So by occupying a niche and making yourself top of mind within that niche for having a relevant, distinctive, credible solution is probably the best way forward, because it's almost inevitable that the likes of Salesforce will be invited to that party if someone's worked with Salesforce before, as many have, and understand what they're good at, which is many things. So you have to find somewhere where your point of difference is relevant and distinctive and credible. And that's what market research can help you uncover.
I think of one now like Viva, I suppose, is like kind of some that focused very much on healthcare. Or maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong, Viva, but they're like very focused on healthcare. So probably they compete with Salesforce in some cases, but I guess their target audience is slightly different. One of the things you touched on there about Mark Ritson and the other, they're institution you're probably aware of in Australia called
Ehrenberg Bass. Yeah.
Exactly, Ehrenberg Bass. Byron Sharp, they talk a lot about the different laws of brand. And one of the things that's around double jeopardy about if you're the small brand, the smaller size, it's you're competing against economies of scale, but you're also competing against this like fame, is what you mentioned as well. Do you think for like small B2B brands, is there any, apart from agility, is there any other ways from what that they can try to maybe outmaneuver or like try to gain some market share in some of those categories? By either, I don't know if it's customers that they serve or even the way that they position themselves, or
I think it's incredibly difficult. The theory you're talking about, the share of voice. If you work for Procter and Gamble, I don't suppose that's a particularly difficult argument to take to your CFO and say, we need to outspend the competition, otherwise we will lose market share. If you're a bootstrapped startup in B2B, outspending HubSpot or Microsoft or whoever, it's just an absolute non-starter. You don't have the money. And so you have to think much more sharply about what is relevant and distinctive and credible about your particular offer compared to what the market take to market, as your competitors take to market. One really interesting thing to do is to talk to your competitors' customers. So Sam Walton couldn't do this, of course, because he couldn't stand in a Kmart and ask, why do you shop here? But if you speak to your competitors' customers and you ask them to what extent they are happy or unhappy with the solution that they have got right now, if you focus on the kind of brands that are scoring 4s and 5s rather than 8s or 9s, you can find out where they are currently letting their market down, and then focus your sales efforts on where you are stronger than they are, where they are vulnerable. So you don't have to place the whole market. You focus on prospects who are using a competitor's product, who are vulnerable in some way to an element of the proposition where you are strong and they are weak, and focus your ABM, your advertising, your sales effort around that particular niche. That's the lowest hanging fruit. Where are they weak, where we are strong? Let's focus on that. Because let's be realistic. Yeah, unless you are Procter & Gamble, unless you are Ford, unless you are Shell, you don't have the budget to be able to do what Professors Ritson and Shaw are replicating.
That's the other thing as well, I think, is do you think, and this is probably maybe controversial, but I think it needs to be said as well. It's like a lot of the research is out there. We're basing this on enterprise companies that have large budgets, that have huge data pools, already existing customer base, already existing category leadership. And when I worked in LinkedIn as well, a lot of the B2BI research as well, it's around enterprise. But if you look at where a lot of the growth is coming in LinkedIn now, it's coming from smaller SMB companies that are growing. But if they're to take those kind of things of using the tactics of an enterprise brand, it's a longer game that you're playing. It's difficult to be able to sustain that. Like what you mentioned about Procter and Gamble. Do you see any research that kind of speaks to the SMBs, the growing companies that have to make sure that every quarter they're prudent about where they're investing, where they're placing their bets? Is there any research that you see that kind of goes, okay, look, that playbook is for enterprise. If you're looking at this, is giving you more research on this segment or this size of the market?
Principles are the same across the market. It just, your focus and the focus of your budget just has to get sharper if you've got less money. As I say, relevance, distinctiveness, credibility are the three things that your proposition needs to have. And if you define your market more narrowly, then you can spend your budget more sharply, understanding you have a relevant, distinctive, credible proposition, or indeed where you don't. Use that data to inform your product strategy so that you can actually come to market with something that is actually going to have some resonance in the marketplace. In certain respects, it's even more important for smaller organizations to find out what that niche is. Where are the larger organizations leaving the smaller ones behind? And there is certainly in B2B and certainly in technology a fair bit of evidence that the biggest players are really interested in making big enterprise sales and are less interested in satisfying the smallest ends of the market, which is maybe where a B2B startup with a relevant, distinctive, credible product can actually start to get some traction where the big boys don't really want to play.
Makes a lot of sense. What do you think then when you look at the distribution part? So like you mentioned here about relevance, distinctiveness and credibility. The distribution part that we see a lot now in B2B, there's a trend in terms of when you have that credibility of like building trust, distributing that to a particular type of buying committee. So you're going to build recall and so on. Do you see anything of like with the trend now, like B2B creators, for want of a better word, or thought leadership, subject matter experts, in any of the research that do you see that this makes an impact in terms of the building credibility for a particular vendor in a category by partnering with these subject matter experts to educate their audience or their buying committee more on this service or the customers that they serve?
I'm under NDA with my clients, so I can't go into great detail about who or what particularly works. Thought leadership is an interesting one. If you're in mid-management and you have a challenge, you can always ask your boss, I'm not sure how to approach this. What do you think I should do? And your boss says, I've seen this before, and what I think you should do is this. And you can talk that through. But once you get onto the C-suite, you can't really ask your boss. Imagine if you're a CTO saying, I'm not sure whether we should be in the cloud or on-prem. What do you think? Because the CEO is going to say, that's what I'm paying you to know. So the C-suite can't actually ask their boss, nor can they really be seen to ask the people who report into them, because they're supposed to know. And the CTO can't really ask the CHRO or the CNRO, what do you think we should do? Go to the cloud or stay on-prem? And that's where thought leadership, I think, comes into its own. The C-suite tend to read The Economist, they read Management Today, they will look on LinkedIn, and they will look to follow people who understand their problems and have solutions for them. And I think that's where thought leadership is really important in terms of reaching out to the C-suite and having a credible voice, which, if you work for an organization, gives that organization a certain credibility and the ability to deliver a particular solution. And it all circles back. They enter the buying trigger. Who have we heard of who's got a good solution to this? Now, I read something in Management Today the other week that this guy, he's head of new product development, IBM, or whatever it is, HP, for example. He seems to know what he's talking about, or she's written a piece that is really resonant, and maybe we should be talking to them. Particularly important in law. Normally, when someone appoints a law firm, what they actually want is a lawyer. And so if you're a lawyer and you tweet and blog about your particular area of specialism, not only does that talk up your organization's competence, but it talks up your particular competence within the firm. So when someone approaches your firm and say, you're the experts in maritime law, I need a maritime lawyer, but this woman here, she really knows her onions in terms of what I want. And that means that partner gets asked for in person rather than just the law firm itself. So within law or in lots of consultancy, if you as an individual have established a niche for yourself, really understanding a particularly valuable part of what your industry is built around, then you can do very well out of it. So yeah, thought leadership is important, building credit, and it helps build credibility for the individual consultant as well as the organization they're working for.
Do you see that companies are leaning into it now more so than ever because of the digital footprint that people have in the last, say, 10 years or so, like platforms like LinkedIn? Obviously, you mentioned The Economist as well. Are companies looking at, now we see the trend, like every company is like a mini media company, for want of a better word, that so everyone is trying to lean into this to have their subject matter expert in the hope of driving some kind of a commercial outcome. Do you see that, or do you see that there's some companies that are still not really sold on the idea?
Not everyone's sold on the idea, but the ones who are probably going to lead the way in the future. We come back to training data for AI. So imagine you need a new CRM, but you're in the shipping industry, whatever it is. You could go onto an LLM and say, what are the 5 leading CRMs for CRM in the shipping industry? That LLM is going to be trained on the data, not just market share data, but also who the influencers are, what views they hold, it's a whole magic 8 ball, black box, whatever you want to call it. But if a particular voice is resonant in the industry, is widely shared, widely quoted, like Mark Ritson in our own industry, well, they will give greater weight to their views because they seem to be more widely shared, they
Yeah.
appear more often, they're more knowledgeable. So therefore, it's almost the 21st century version of SEO. To be quoted by the LLMs, you do have to be out there online having a relevant, distinctive, credible opinion about your audience in order for the LLMs to pick up on what you say and maybe recommend you as a person that the audience should be speaking for too, to get the particular solution they're looking for. And I think, LLMs are a curious thing because they do hallucinate, but you do need to feed the beast in order for you to come top of the search when people ask LLMs for recommendations.
One other thing as well, I think that's really interesting in B2B is a lot of the research says that, and you probably know System One and John Evans, and they do a lot of research in terms of ads and ad copy and so on. And this merges into B2C as well. And it comes back of that sometimes ad copy and the message is not left long enough in the market to resonate. And I think Mark Ritson has a thing, he's like, you're taking your buns out of the oven too quickly or something like that. Some paraphrase he uses. But do you see that in the research that you have then as well? Like that when you're researching certain categories, the ones that are actually just, it seems like they're being repetitive, but they're actually not. They're just being more consistent. And if you're looking at timeframes, if you were to say to somebody like in B2B, if they have a market differentiation, if they have some copy, what do you see as being the most effective in terms of a time frame that they should be keeping that message in the market for? Now, I know that's a general question, but maybe from the research that you
It's a
see.
relevant one because, again, the LinkedIn Institute said 95% of people in your target audience aren't in market for your solution at any one particular time. So you need to lodge in their brain that you have a relevant, distinctive, credible proposition, solution to their problem. But you have to be in market 2-3 years saying this because purchase cycles are long. Whereas FMCG, new mayonnaise comes out. Oh, look, it's garlic mayo. Should we try that one this week? Yeah, okay. And if you don't like it, you don't buy it the next time. B2B business cycles aren't much, much longer. And you do need to be consistent with your messaging. John Hegarty of Bartle Bogle Hegarty talks about creative consistency when he was doing the Levi's ads in the 1980s, 1990s. There was a certain tone to the great Levi's advertising that was continuous across ad after ad. They weren't the same, but there was a consistency in how those ads were produced, how they were presented, which gave them a position over time, which probably still resonates today. I think it's harder for businesses these days. I worked in advertising in the 1990s, Loud Spink, doing ads doing a Tesco. But when Tesco first formulated the phrase "every little helps," they're still using it today. And back in those days, Volkswagen could own reliability, Heineken could own refreshment, Stella Artois could own reassuringly expensive. Because back in those days, for consumers, you could reach half the nation in a day with a single 40-second ad at Coronation Street that was repeated in the middle news at 10. Media fragmentation now means that it's really hard to do that, but that makes it all the more important that your messaging is consistent. So that whatever touch point people see you is on TV, on radio, is in radio, press, outdoor, or online, wherever online explodes. If your messaging is consistent, then you are more likely to lodge in someone's brain than constantly trying to reinvent yourself in the search for something. I think that over time, the brands that are most consistent will prove to have the most consistent sales. I think that's still true.
I guess the challenge is the balance, isn't it? It's you're trying to get the quarterly revenue targets and keep your hand on the wheel to ensure that, that's going to break into that 5% when they're in market.
It's a really tough call. It's a really tough call because the temptation is if you are at the end of a quarter and you're underwater in terms of your sales, is you turn off the brand dial, you take your money out of brand and you put it into sales activation. The challenge is that, whisper it quietly, the art of brand management is convincing your target audience to pay more than they need to to acquire the solution you're trying to get them to buy, because they pay more than they need to. That creates margin. Margin creates profit, and ultimately that's what you're after. So you need to lodge in people's mind that your solution has value. The challenge with sales activation is that it chips away at. If you look at some of the world's most profitable brands, the MWs and Mercedes of this world, there's a reason why you never drive past a Mercedes garage or a BMW garage and it says sale now on everything must go. It's because they're not that stupid. It irritates me when CFOs want to know what the ROI is on a sponsorship campaign, for example. I will bet you a lot of money Mercedes have no idea what the ROI is on Mercedes sponsoring a Formula One team. No idea. They can't do, because it's impossible to isolate it from all the other things that Mercedes do. But I'm certain they get a return on it. And I would, maybe cheekily, if I was a CMO and asked for the ROI on my sponsorship, ask the CFO what the ROI is on their finance team. I bet they couldn't tell you. The biggest brands tend not to cheapen themselves with visible sales activation, but it doesn't mean they don't do it. Mercedes and BMW, if they're struggling at quarter end, will do direct mail to drive footfall to showrooms, to a specific group of people that they reckon are on the cusp of buying either their brand or someone else's, and try and drive traffic that way. But they don't stick it on the side of buses, and they don't stick it on TV because they're cute about it. And maybe that's the conversation a CMO has to have with the CFO, that they are going to have to invest both in long-term brand resonance in order to persuade people to pay more than they might need to buy that brand, as much as getting people through the door when the chips are down and there's 3 months to the end of the quarter. What Mark Ritson would call boathism, and I absolutely subscribe to that.
Makes a lot of sense as well, because you're really killing your price power by just having a sale, and it defeats the fact of a luxury brand as well. What do you think in B2B at the moment, from the last, say you've been in it for 3 decades, what has changed in your opinion? Like, I know that we discussed at the start of staying close to the customer. That's still fundamental now, even despite LLMs and having a proprietary kind of data set and key information that you won't necessarily get from an LLM. But what do you think has changed in terms of, if we can see obviously the explosion of media and the fragmentation and all that, but anything else that you see that have changed over the last, say, 30 years in B2B particularly that surprised you?
Certainly media fragmentation has changed. I think also business models have changed. A lot of technology companies now are interested in ARR. So how can we get people paying us month on month and creating what in the insurance world will be called trailing commission? So you sell to them once, but every month they pay and pay, in the line of the Lou Reed song. And so the business models have shifted much more into getting recurring revenue rather than making one-off sales. And that's, again, we're starting to see that in the most curious areas. So I believe BMW sell a car now. It's equipped with a heated seat. All cars have them, but you can only access that if you pay a monthly fee for BMW to unlock the seat heating app in their car, thus creating recurring revenue on a single sale. And that's certainly true in B2B, certainly in technology. That's what the golden goal that all of them seem to be after. Get people on a longer contract, get them to pay us every month, and we'll be fine.
I'd love to talk to you then about, you mentioned as well, you touched on a few people in the industry. And would you say that like the loudest voices seem to have the most visibility, but not necessarily the most knowledge about a certain subject matter expert? No, because if you look at B2B, we have some voices that are very prominent in the field, and they talk on B2B, B2C sometimes, and they have a constant presence there. Maybe they've written some books, done some research, but I still believe, and you're in the research part, so you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm of the belief that there is still a huge amount of information out there, and those people that are commissioning that, doing it, maybe aren't as vocal about what they're finding, what they're working on, but those that are like gaining the spotlight, shall we say, like when you look at research, and obviously talking to clients is one thing, but like looking at peers in the industry, what are your go-tos, and who do you like that would say they give really good insight, but there's not as many people are aware of them because maybe they're not just completely tuned in the B2B research space?
Certainly a marketer I follow a lot. She's not pure B2B, but she talks a huge amount of sense. It's called Zoe Scarman. Look her up on LinkedIn.
Mm.
She's an incredibly knowledgeable marketer, understands consumer behavior to an astonishing degree, and has some incredibly nuanced views on how propositions work, how markets change and develop, and how marketers need to approach the challenges they've got. Definitely look her up. I've never met her, never worked with her, but I follow her on LinkedIn, and beyond the Ritsons and the Sharps of this world, very interesting lady to look at.
Great. We'll put her in the show notes as well. Simon, if anybody wants to find out about you, about the research, I will put your link of LinkedIn, but where else are you most active? Where do you share content about what you're working on?
I have my own website, but I pretty much post everything on there on LinkedIn everywhere. I'm also an active member of the Business Marketing Club, which
Okay.
is a not-for-profit B2B association networking opportunity for anyone who's in B2B marketing in the UK to meet up and chat about the challenges you face with lots and lots of B2B marketers. We all have the same challenges. We all need new customers. We all need bigger margins. We all need new insights. And it's just a great way to meet people. And I'm a big supporter of the Business Marketing Club. So maybe your listeners, viewers might want to look them up as well.
Definitely, we'd put it in the show notes. And they have events regularly enough as well.
Yeah, they're mainly in London, but they do have them outside London from time to time. It's very informal, and it's just a great way to meet kindred spirits and find that everyone else has the same dreadful challenges.
Community is key as well. I think it's if COVID has proved anything like that, it's fundamental, these in-person events.
Yeah.
Simon, it was a pleasure talking with you and having you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed talking to you too.
Thanks.
Okay, cheers. Thank you very much.